Hello and welcome to Press TV's Debate. I'm Marcia Hashimi. Thanks so much for being with us. So a war started on March 26, 2015, but many people hadn't heard about it. And even now, after more than 15 months since the start, Saudi Arabia continues to bombard Yemen, mostly targeting civilian areas and infrastructure. More than 10,000 people have been reportedly killed. However, the biggest victims are the smallest ones, the children, who have already been killed, and many others who are dying a slow death. Many are asking, as the rate of cancer and other diseases is rising in Yemen, especially amongst the children, is all of this a direct result of the Saudis using illegal weapons such as phosphorus and cluster bombs? And some witnesses say even small nuclear bombs have been used against the Yemeni people. Stay with us as we take a look at Yemen.
Saudi Arabia's use of internationally banned weapons in war on Yemen has always been condemned by human rights groups. Northern Sada province is one of the hardest hit areas where banned weaponry, including US-made cluster bombs, have been heavily used there. Medical workers tell us about unprecedented rise in incurable diseases.
Our specialists receive strange cases such as burned skin due to the use of white phosphorus bombs. Sometimes immediately after the Saudi airstrikes, we receive patients with suffocation because they inhaled gas released by the bombs. We haven't encountered such cases before. We sent sometimes patients to Sana'a, and there they were diagnosed with cancer. Newly born babies are disfigured.
Internationally banned weapons have not only affected civilian areas, but it also destroyed agricultural lands. People say this is said to have a lasting impact on humans, animals, and vegetation. Saada is known for producing best fruits and agricultural products in Yemen. But local people say the Saudis are targeting their plantations and farms with chemical weapons.
Amid the international silence, the Saudis are using all kinds of weapons with short and long-term effects on people's health. You can look in the ground and see by yourself that most of the blossoms on the trees have fallen down. That has led to a decrease in our production.
Under pressure from rights groups documenting series of Saudi violations of the rule of law, the United States recently decided to stop the sale of cluster bombs to Saudi Arabia. But many observers yet doubt that the U.S. is serious to follow its own laws. Mohammed Al-Attab, Press TV, Saada Province, Northern Yemen.
I welcome my guest to the program out of London, Director of Human Rights for Yemen, Ms. Kim Sharif, and out of Washington, D.C., member of the U.S. Congressional Defense Policy Advisor, Mr. Frederick Peterson. Thank you both for being with us. Well, let's start this off with Mr. Peterson. In your perspective, the United Nations says thousands of Yemeni children, all under 5 years of age, have lost their lives during the past year alone. What does that mean, and why isn't there just total global outrage at such a figure?
Well, what that means is, what you're stating is a very obvious and evident human tragedy, but it is more than a tragedy. When a child dies intentionally targeted, it is not a tragedy, it is an atrocity. When a child dies as collateral damage through irresponsible use of weapons, that also is an atrocity. However, children, as well as adults, as well as your lead up to this claimed dates and crops, are often tragically casualties of war that are unintended. And the question is the intention and the responsibility of those who are inflicting casualties on both sides for the application of their force. And that children have died is not surprising. Children are casualties, unfortunately, in all wars. And it makes a more painful story to hear when any life dies, but particularly a child, an innocent life. And what I would suggest is that there have been casualties of innocents on both sides to the degree that those are inflicted on either side by those with an impure heart or intention to inflict that unacceptable moral harm upon the enemy, that enemy being from either side, they should endure the moral opprobrium of the world. However, this is a war, and there will be casualties. The justice of that war can be discussed, but we should not be surprised that there are innocents who are dying because, as history has taught us, war is hell, and we are enduring a hell throughout the world today, perhaps in reparation for our sins.
All right, Ms. Sharif, your take, Mr. Peterson said, I mean, it is war, and casualties have taken place on both sides. Something seems to be neglected from time to time in dealing with the situation that's happening in Yemen. It's that Saudi warplanes are actually the ones targeting, that's flying over Yemen. It's not the Yemeni warplanes targeting Saudi Arabia or the people of Saudi Arabia. How do you see this in putting in perspective? Because at the same time, we have seen a very high increase in birth defects and as well as various cancers, especially amongst the children. Do you see a relationship between perhaps the bombs or the type of weapons that the Saudis are using and what's happening, especially to the children in Yemen?
Yes, good afternoon to you all. Actually saddened and deeply appalled at the blasé attitude that Mr. Peterson is taking to the mass murder and extermination of innocent children in the Yemen taking place with the help and support of his country by means of supplying the actual weapons of mass destruction to this irresponsible militia of dictatorship known as Saudi Arabia. And the fact is, he knows very well that his country is providing logistics and intelligence in this illegal war in this poor and weakened country of the Middle East, Yemen. To say that the casualties are unintended is quite frankly nonsense. And if I were him, to save what is left of any moral compass that they may have, the US regime, I would take that back, because there is no such thing as unintended in this instance, because there are reports from Amnesty, there are reports from Human Rights Watch, there are reports from many other NGOs all confirming that civilian areas have been deliberately targeted. And let's not forget, both Britain and the US are providing logistics and intelligence. And Adel Al-Jubeiri has openly said in an interview live on TV that it is the British and the Americans who are telling them what to target. So for him to now, Mr. Peterson, to say that this was an unintended casualty, quite frankly, is nonsense, with the greatest respect. Secondly, he's speaking about both sides. Who are these both sides? There is Yemen, a small, poor country that is being attacked illegally by not less than 14 countries, and most of those countries are from the Security Council, with the greatest sadness in this instance, because the UN itself has lost the moral compass in this instance. There is extermination taking place in the Yemen. There are birth defects. There was quite clearly testing of some kind of nuclear weapons. And at the end of the day, if you are really a true democracy, how on earth do you justify aiding and abetting the crimes of extermination, war crimes and genocide of a militia of dictatorship that is supplying to you terrorists? They supplied 15 of 9/11. Have you forgotten that? Don't you think that the people of America deserve respect and justice? Okay. Don't you think you as a nation deserve to respect yourself and stop befriending known rogue criminals like the Saudi regime and those other militia of the Gulf states?
All right, stay with me, Ms. Sharif, stay with me. Let me get Mr. Peterson back in on this. Mr. Peterson, your take, do you think that the United States and the UK that they are responsible because these are the main two entities that are actually equipping Saudi Arabia, whether we're talking about the planes that are used to bomb or we're talking about cluster bombs and other munitions that the United States is actually providing along with logistical support?
Well, if your other guest would replace hysteria with reason and rational argument, we would perhaps be able to come to a better understanding between us. But when one shouts and makes his accusations across the airwaves, one invites a similar response, which I'm going to avoid. Weapons of mass destruction were referred to. I don't know if your other guest has any idea what she's talking about, but weapons of mass destruction, when they kill someone, yes, they have been a weapon of mass destruction to that individual. But in common accepted parlance, there have been no weapons of mass destruction that have been used there. Cluster bombs, individual ordnance from artillery, dropped from airplanes that have been used in that war have been either point or area weapons, but they have not been weapons of mass destruction. There is absolutely no suggestion of that by any rational or acceptable source. What we have here is really exaggerations intended to make a point and achieve an argument that the truth and a rational observation will not do. Yes, the British, the Americans, several other countries have contributed to an alliance that has been largely prosecuted by Saudi Arabia against the opposing side in Yemen. There have been atrocities on both sides. We come to the question of intent. And I will submit, and I hope your other guest can join me as well as the host, that when there is an intention to inflict atrocity, this is a moral objection we all can have, whether it is done by an ally or by an enemy. It has yet to be proven that the Saudis, because they have inflicted casualties, have intended the collateral damage of those casualties.
Okay, Mr. Peterson, I asked you a different question. Stay with me, Mr. Peterson.
Yes.
Stay with me, Mr. Peterson.
Sure.
I asked you a different question. I asked you as far as the responsibility. Stay with me, Ms. Shetty. Mr. Peterson, I asked you about the responsibility of London and Washington in providing these type of weapons. Do you think that they play a role in this at all? You're talking about you're not sure about the intent, but we're talking about 10,000 people being killed, most of them civilians.
He's ignoring all the evidence that has been presented by Human Rights Watch. He's ignoring all the evidence presented by Amnesty. He's calling me hysterical. Yes, I am angry because it is infuriating to murder children knowingly and sit back and do nothing about it. You can sit back and quietly speak about it as if it's not happening. Well, it is actually happening, and if you have go and Google Atan attack and you will see that mini nuclear attack there. Yes, that is a weapon of mass destruction. The same thing that you have used as an argument last time, that you invaded Iraq illegally. How come is it allowed now to happen to the Yemen and no one is doing anything about it? Is it because you're making a lot of money out of this war? Clearly, because you're the one who's selling the weapon. And please, you are the one who have lost the moral compass here, and you can't sit back arrogantly tell me that I am hysterical. Yes, it is infuriating to murder innocent children, and you should know that better than me, because you're the one who is claiming to uphold principles of morality and democracy and freedom, which you don't have. You've lost the moral compass. After Iraq and Yemen now, you're gone, you're finished. Where are you standing now? What do you stand for? Where is your principles of democracy? When you are actually supplying weapons to known militia of dictators who you know are committing war crimes and crimes against humanity. Wasn't it Ban Ki-moon a few days ago putting them on the black list? until they came back and threatened to withhold their aid. Yes, you can sit back and flick your fingers because it isn't your children who are being murdered every day illegally by an evil regime. But I will tell you this, sooner or later, divine justice will come in and will deal with you and will pay you back, because you see, Goliath can never beat David, and that is a divine justice, and it will be delivered, and it will be delivered sooner or later.
Okay. Well, what about that, Mr. Peterson? We're talking about, for example, cluster bombs that you say that the United States is providing, and of course they are, to Saudi Arabia, cluster bombs that has been banned actually by more than 100 countries. And then we're talking about Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, the same country that many Americans would point the finger at as far as having involvement in the worst terrorist attack in your country. What is the connection here? Why would Washington then provide these type of weapons to such an entity? Is it just a money situation? Is it because of the billions of dollars in contracts that U.S. and the U.K. has with Saudi Arabia, or is it something else?
I quite agree with you that I and many other Americans are uncomfortable, excuse me, quite uncomfortable with the totality of the relationship with Saudi Arabia that is often behind the scenes involved in instigating and promulgating the dissensions within the Middle East. And yet they are not alone in doing that. They are not the sole player in doing that, and perhaps not even the most egregious violator of that. And perhaps an argument is being made that they're doing so defensively as much as offensively. That can be discussed with your other guest, rationally, we hope. And yet these charges of an attempt to have a genocide upon the Yemeni people. I'll tell you what, there are more than 18 countries that are involved in this alliance to which your other guest refers. And the combined military powers of all of them, let alone any one of them, if they wanted to have genocide committed or an erasure of the Yemeni people, it would happen in, about 20 minutes. That's about all it would take. That is not being done. In fact, there are very complex, complicated rules of engagement that are being followed or attempted to be followed, and I will submit they are violated occasionally, either by intention or by mistake.
Okay, Mr.
Where they are violated by intention, they should be prosecuted.
You talked about genocide. Mr. Peterson, you're talking about a population of 24 million people, 10,000 of whom have been killed in 1 year. What is the definition of genocide? How many people have to die before it is considered genocide?
One legitimate weapon of mass destruction
sanction the killing of everybody in the world, because clearly he is very uncomfortable with ethnic people to start with, because you see, he expects us to be Uncle Toms. If we express ourselves in the way that we know best to express ourselves, he'll call us irrational, because he's so familiar with the Uncle Toms who will say to him, yes, Amasa. We will not say yes, Amasa, Mr. Peterson. You are aiding and abetting genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes, and that is a fact. It is recorded by your own NGOs who are independent. It is recorded by the UN and everywhere else. You can't sit here and pretend it's not happening, okay?
Well, let's talk about the UN. Ms. Shetty, if you just brought up the UN. Mr. Peterson, let me get in this. Mr. Peterson, we did see the UN actually blacklist Saudi Arabia because of its crimes against the children in Yemen. And then we saw immediately the UN do a total U-turn. What does that mean in your perspective?
Well, it means that the UN is trying to have it both ways as usual, and a very undependable forum for either moral opprobrium or actually dependable policy. Dependable for either side. The UN has proven to be, over time, a very bad place to go to actually get anything done, a very good place to go to have drinks up on the Upper East Side of Manhattan and talk about the terrible horrors in the rest of the world while you're enjoying peace and security. Your guest is broadcasting very anti-British, anti-American remarks from a capital of one of the countries that of which she is complaining.
Yes, because
I
we
would
live
ask
in a
her if she would
democracy
be
and we
able
have
to
a
do the
right to freely
same.
express ourselves.
If-
Contrary to what you have in the US, you
Yes,
pretend to have
yes.
democracy in the country, but you don't allow your citizens to exercise freedom of speech. You don't. We are used to that. This is our tradition. This is the greatest value of Great Britain. We have a right to speak and to tell our government if it's wrong, that it is wrong, unlike what you have over there. Thank you very much.
Well, let's look at Miss Sharif.
Yes, well, thank you very much. Do you have the right to do that in Yemen? Do you have the right to do that in Yemen?
Oh, yes, indeed. They do, ever since they toppled the puppet regime that you had placed in. Yes. In fact, I find the Yemen has much better freedom of expression than we actually have here in Europe. So it's incredible how much freedom of expression is going on at the moment with the de facto government, despite the blockade and the relentless hysterical bombardment for over a year now, and the murder of all those innocent people. Yes, they are enjoying an incredible amount of freedom of expression. Thank you. And I am a British woman, and I have a right to express myself, and I'm not going to say yes, Amasa, I'm not Uncle Tom. Remember that. I'm an ethnic woman. This is how I speak. Get used to it.
And on that note, I would love to continue with this discussion, but we are fresh out of time. I appreciate both of you being with us out of London. Director of Human Rights for Yemen, Ms. Kim Sharif, and out of Washington, D.C., Mr. Frederick Peterson, U.S. Congressional Defense Policy Advisor. And as always, viewers, we appreciate you being with us on another debate right here at Press TV. I'm Marzieh Hashemi signing out for myself and all the crew right here in Tehran. Thanks so much, and see you next time.